Lee, if we could just start out with this. I don't know how you did it. I don't know how you start out as a ninth grader for the first time in wrestling, have average results, and then 5 years later in the NCAA championship finals, and then a few years later you're making history, won a world championship. You lived through it. How do you do that? How do you make such a quick progression to become the best in the world in such a short period of time?
I've had a lot of time to reflect on it now. I'm 63 now, and even though I got out of wrestling, I got back in wrestling around 2006. And so I've been kind of thinking about this my whole career, really. So the way I would answer that is every once in a while, it's a blessing to be able to connect with something that you really love, a thing, a job, occupation, whatever. Uh, and you see it in all disciplines in life. You see it in, entertainment. You see it in, you know, uh, business even. One of my roommates is a very adept and successful in business. And I watch him. I'm real good friends with him. And he just has something a little extra, a little different than everybody else. I look at the great entertainers of the world. They have something a little bit different. I'm not trying to compare myself with Michael Jordan or anything, but obviously he's got something a little bit different than the other great ball players. And I think I had something a little bit different too, which allowed me to achieve success so rapidly. Um, and I think because you connect with something that you really love, that's the key right there. You love something and you're passionate and you pour like 100% of yourself into it. And that's the difference I see is people hold back. We all do. You know, I'm a great example of that. I held back in school academically when I was in undergrad. I wasn't going to put forth the effort to get an A in a class. I got the C because my major was wrestling in college, basically. Um, but I stayed eligible. I was a C average or whatever, because that was fine. That's all I really cared about. But I got A pluses in wrestling. Once I, went to graduate school and to work on toward my MBA, and I was paying for that at that time. And I went through the boycott of '80. So I realized wrestling was not going to give me a career, a life financially. It wasn't going to be able to provide for me financial the way I wanted to be in my life. And it wasn't like it is now with some of the coaches making $250,000 to coach wrestling. And I appreciate that they can make that. Like Chris Bono at Wisconsin. When I applied at Wisconsin, the job was paying like 40 grand then back in 1985 or something like that. So anyway, when I went to the boycott of '80, I decided I had to do something to prepare myself. So I went to graduate school and I got almost all A's. Why? Because it was important to me, first of all. I became passionate about it and I put the effort into it similarly like I did in wrestling. But to get back to the original question and the answer, it was I found something I could be passionate about. And this is the key. I've heard this from lots of other successful people as well. They say that they would have done their sport for free, or they would have done their craft and made no money because they loved it so much. Now, maybe that's a little bit of an overstatement because you do have to get paid for stuff. But a lot of people who were really good at something, they were so passionate about it that money and success and fame wasn't really the reason they were doing it. They did it because they really loved it. So that's where I was at with wrestling. There was no thought of making any money from it. I didn't think I was ever going to make any money from it. It was really hard, but I was passionate about it, and I fell in love with it. So I was willing to do anything that I possibly could to be as good as I possibly could be. And it sounds too simple of an answer, but when I'm around another successful athlete or entertainer or business person, they are passionate. I can remember John Bardis hired me once at one of his companies. And because I was living in Atlanta and I didn't really know anybody, I just stayed in the office really late. And I thought I was the only person in the office once. And I heard these someone walking down the hallway. And it was late. The lights were off. It was dark. I thought I was the only one in the whole building. And it was John. Here's a guy who's, been very successful, made lots of money. Obviously, he just loves making something work the way it's supposed to work in the healthcare industry. And it just fit right in line with everything I know about being successful. It's being passionate about it. And there's people that kind of accidentally make money at things that they're passionate about. And typically, if you're the best in the world at something, you will make some money at it. And I will say I never made money directly really from wrestling during those years. But I will tell you that I still do privates now. I still do clinics. I still do speaking engagements because of wrestling. So in a sense, I'm still drawing upon wrestling. And now it's kind of moved over into business. I get asked to speak a fair amount because of the success I've had, not only in wrestling, but in business. And I kind of relate the two.
Take us through, though, some of the actual processes that took place, because it's not like it just comes to you. Like, what was the process that you took it to wrestling to expedite that process? So in that 5-year window, you got good really fast.
And this is the part of it that not everybody is going to be able to probably relate to, maybe, I guess you could say. But this is another thing that I've observed in my own life and even other people's lives. Typically, great success quickly or passionately with a lot of intensity, the way I did it, usually before that was some severe hardships and disappointments that keep someone hungry. If I can use the word hungry, if you make someone really, really hungry, and they're going to want to eat, figure out somehow. But if you're not hungry, and I use the word hungry to mean a lot of different things, in want of something or in need of something. And I think, and this is the cerebral part of it, I think because of the way I was, brought into the world, I was adopted at 5, my mother gave me up. And I remember being alone a lot in my life. And just because I was in a foster home until I was 5. Typically, I was on the road to being institutionalized in the adoption or the foster care process. Usually you don't adopt a child when they're older like that. Most people want to adopt an infant, So because you're alone and you're with your own thoughts a lot, you reflect a lot about things, and so you're very comfortable with being deep in thought. And my future was always uncertain. I was being moved around a lot. So you learn how to adapt kind of instinctively. You learn how to adapt to things. And so you learn how to accept change. And this is really cerebral. Obviously, not everyone's going to be able to go down that path that I went through, but the coaches, the athletes that I talk to about it, I try to have them simulate it. I don't tell them why I'm telling them this, but I tell them that you have to be able to adapt to change very quickly. What does that mean is, you have to do things you've never done before. And when I was going through the wrestling process, I kept putting myself in wrestling training situations that were challenging. And then when I was able to deal with that challenge, I put myself into another challenging situation. And I kept doing that. And I wasn't afraid to fail. And I was more than willing to wrestle with the best guy I knew all the time. So when I first started to decide I wanted to be good at wrestling, I went to this YMCA that had, it was the precursor to the wrestling clubs that we have now. And I watched the room and I could visually see who were the better wrestlers. And I walked right up to the best guy in the room and I wanted to go with him. Of course, I got beat up, but the guy I wrestled with, his name was Jim Perko. Never forget the guy's name. He ended up being second in the state. And he lost to Mike Deanna. These are names, Mike Deanna, you'll of course know of his name, from Iowa. But in that room, Jim Perko ended up losing to Mike Deanna on a referee decision overtime. That's how good this guy was. Mike wasn't in that room, but Jim Perko was. I saw he was a good wrestler. This is before I was anybody in wrestling. And he never beat me up, but he beat me. You know, I could see he was better than me. So I always wanted to work out with him. So to answer your question, you can't be afraid to fail, because I was failing every day in practice. Instead of going with someone that I could beat, I went with someone that I couldn't beat. So I was always in a state of, challenge. I wasn't winning in the room. You don't have to win all the time to be to be good. But I could see myself getting better against this guy. And lo and behold, we wrestled in a tournament, because we were in this club, the Y, whatever. And so we were always looking for competition. So we were in the finals of this tournament. And I lost to him in a close match, much closer than I thought it was going to be, because he was beating me a lot by bigger margins in the room. And that started to give me confidence that I could be really good. So it's just those little tiny steps I was taking in that summer that I was in this club exponentially catapulted me. I think I redeemed years where most wrestlers might take years to get to that point. I did it in a matter of a summer, because I was constantly challenging myself with really the best people that I could put around me. Like, I was exposed to Pat Milkovich in that room. Pat was a national champion in college. He was a little smaller than me, but he's better than me. And I wrestled with him in the room. Tony DiGiovanni, another name, Cleveland name. I was always willing to go with the very best guy in the room. I can remember when I tell the Gable story. You've heard the story many times. I had just come off a 500 season. That summer was the summer of the Olympics. Dan was preparing to go to Munich to win a gold medal, and I asked him to work out, and he said no, because he was trained. But he was really very polite, very respectful. He didn't make me feel stupid for asking him that question. But that's because I saw he was the best guy. I wanted to spar with him. So that fresh mentality of wanting to put yourself out there, it could be embarrassing, obviously. It's almost like in the classroom, when the teacher says and invites questions and nobody raises their hand, and the teacher says, no question is a dumb question, trying to encourage someone to just engage, learn, figure this out. And pretty soon a few hands go up. And there's a few dumb questions come up too. But it's that, and I raised a few dumb questions, and I did some dumb things trying to go with really good people. But in that process of learning is how you grow really, really fast. And the problem is a lot of wrestlers will wait their turn. I'll ask wrestlers, young wrestlers, like in junior high, what are your goals? And their goals are just so small, and they're just tiny. And I say, well, why don't you stretch and have a bigger goal? And I can see in their eyes, they just don't think it makes sense. Sometimes I say to them, why don't you think this makes sense? So they're very logical about it. Well, I've only been wrestling so many years, and, blah, 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 all that stuff. But my goal after that summer of meeting Gable, I wanted to be a state champion right away. I was willing to do whatever it took to be a state champion. And I was willing to fail. I had no fear about failing. I had no fear about going into the room, going with the best guy. I didn't lose, though, and that was a little unusual. But I think it was because of my mindset. My mindset was, if I did lose, it wasn't gonna deter me from still wanting to win.